Hello, Tanner.
Hello, Sam.
Happy Tuesday.
Happy Tuesday. If it's not Tuesday when you're watching this, happy day. Happy whatever it is day.
So true. I wore the same color in last week's video, and I'm kind of regretting that. Just from a novelty-seeking perspective.
It is weird, like trying to not repeat outfits too often.
I know.
Including not just for the show, but also like social stuff. Some days I'll just like wear the same outfit like a week in a row, cartoon character style.
No, I've been doing that lately. I'll outfit repeat in real life multiple days in a row. Sometimes I'll even wash an outfit that I like to wear it the next day.
Oh, yeah.
I think I need a little drink. Don't talk to me online until I've had my winter wassail punch from Trader Joe's. All right, well, as per your request on our last video where Jordan Peterson fought Elmo in the streets, today we're going to be talking about Shari Franke's memoir, The House of My Mother. So the last time we talked about Ruby and Jodi, well, we did a live stream, which led to us then briefly appearing in that ABC News documentary. So random. You looked amazing as you looked on silently while I delivered my one line.
An incredible, flawless one line.
We are just going to talk about the book today. Very much in the vein of I'm Glad My Mother Died, like another one of these celebrity, I guess she is a celebrity memoirs detailing childhood abuse. So trigger warning if that's not obvious. There was a lot in the book that we would have expected based on what we knew about 8 Passengers and Ruby and Jodi, but then there were also some surprising revelations that we didn't know about. Overall, I just feel really proud of Shari for having written this book, created this book, and sharing her story because I do think it's powerful. Also, I'm personally really looking forward in sort of a grim way to the era of children of family vloggers coming out and sharing their story, because I think we all have a sense that like that can't be as good as it seems in the YouTube videos, right?
Yeah, there's a day of reckoning for the family bloggers for sure.
I'm hungry for every child's story. But then it's also like, should I even be hungry for every child's story? It's like, I'm not owed that.
Is it just one more layer of the...
Yeah. The fact that they feel like they have to
point.
reclaim their narrative by like spilling their guts out in a memoir. That's a whole other conversation.
Yeah. I mean, as someone who's constantly regurgitating their own childhood trauma on the internet, it's relatable for sure.
I know. I have a book that is, in process right now that I contributed to, where it's just like me writing about my childhood trauma. It's the new factory job. Yeah, so I thought we'd go through the book a little bit today, as you haven't listened to it, and just kind of touch a lot on...
I love that you clarified that if I'm going to be approaching a book, it's going to be ears first and not eyes. I'm going to be listening to that shit.
I listened to this one actually, and I'm glad I did because she read it herself, and I quite enjoyed that. I'm in a bit of an audiobook kick lately, which is very unlike me.
I would call mine more of like a rut where like
That's all you listen to?
Yeah, because you can do it while you're out and about, going on walks.
That's the thing, yeah, because I'm like, I do love physical books. I find them almost easier to focus on, but it's like, yeah, you can only read when you can sit down and read. But I feel like replacing sort of like junky YouTube, TikTok content with audiobooks has been really good for my brain, because I just think it's better to be in sort of one consistent thing that you're consuming rather than, like 5 YouTube videos while you're doing the dishes or whatever. This video will contain, I suppose, spoilers for the book, but it's also, I don't feel like it's one of those things where you necessarily would, I don't know, I guess that just depends on your personality, but it's worth listening to even if you know everything that happens in it, because obviously discourse about it isn't going to be the same as hearing her tell her actual story, and we're going to kind of be just touching on some of the bigger themes, I suppose, and specifically, as we kind of have done in the past with this family, talking about like how Mormon of a story is it? Because I think that is quite an interesting aspect, because obviously, as we know, the average believing LDS person is going to look at a story like this and think, well, obviously, that's not what our church teaches to do. But from our perspective, it's a lot more like, well, there's flavors of what the church encourages you to do. And it was, perhaps taken to these extremes, but it's like people are going to take things to extremes. And so in my mind, this is still very much like a very Mormon story. And obviously, Jodi's entire thing as a therapist, I mean, she built her therapeutic credibility on Mormonism and was getting recommended by bishops and
working with the higher ups of the church to craft church policy.
Yeah, she was using sexual shame as like a major way that she could turn husbands and wives against each other. Also, as we, spoiler alert, just getting into it now, I guess, as we learned from this, it sounds like Ruby and Jodi had queer relations with each other to whatever degree. Shari kind of deliberately didn't go too much into it because she kind of said like that's their own business. But she talked about having like found journal entries and like messages between them. And apparently Ruby had written about how she was frustrated that she always had to service Jodi, but then didn't get like the same amount of servicing in return. That's one of the things she talks about. But Jodi's potential repression is obviously so Mormon, like having to, in some ways, build a whole empire on the back of like needing to repress your sexuality and divert your energy elsewhere and feel worthy despite the ways that you're not like pleasing in the eyes of the Mormon God. So maybe a good entry point into the book is to talk about how the pre-Jodi era, as I kind of mentioned in our last week's video, Jordan Peterson Fights Elmo video, Ruby was a lot worse than I expected before Jodi. Like, this wasn't a woman who was kind of a loving, naive Mormon mother who got brainwashed by this evil therapist and then became sociopathic. She seemed sociopathic before all of that. And kind of one of the early ways that Shari talks about this in the book is she talked about how when Ruby was young, she was really into playing the piano and she wanted to be like a piano master. She wanted to be a pianist. And basically as she tried to pursue that and realized she maybe wasn't like quite as good as she needed to be, or maybe that it wasn't going to come as easy as she thought, or for whatever reason, she wasn't able to like realize her pianist dreams. So she gave up, but then she really put that onto Shari. She really pressured Shari from a young age to be a pianist, like to learn piano. And Shari talks about how like some of her earliest memories are being woken up really early in the morning. I can't remember what time she said. And her mum forcing her to practice piano with her. And her mum's kind of like barking over her shoulder, it's not a supportive learning environment, basically. It's very much like if she made a mistake, she would be yelled at, she would get in trouble. One of the earliest ways that Ruby is kind of projecting onto Shari, making Shari feel small, making her feel scared all the time was through piano.
Damn, not the arts as a weapon.
I know, piano as a weapon.
I don't know who said it, but I saw the quote recently that every child bears the weight of their parents' unlived lives.
Absolutely. In Mormonism, especially so a lot of the time, especially with mothers and daughters or just mothers, because Mormon women especially are corralled into these lives that don't necessarily reflect what they might truly want outside of that.
And from a very early age, disempowers them from even being able to ascertain what it is that they may actually want or who they are outside of that structure. The whole identity and purpose becomes wrapped up in this one thing. And it sucks because it's like there's a world where you can be a mom, you can be a wife, you can, if that is what you want, you can find that out. And just like being open to the world or dating around or having a career doesn't necessarily mean you can't also have those things. But the church very much makes it so young women are, like you said, corralled into this decision, into very early marriages to men they may not be that even attracted to, and vice versa. Got everybody all repressed, like you were saying, and so decisions are made very quickly and based off of temporary feelings rather than like long-term trust building, personality compatibility, and et cetera,
knowing
et cetera.
yourself in any meaningful way. You already have all of these responsibilities, like a spouse and potentially multiple children. By the time you're maybe even starting to wake up to the fact that like this lifestyle might not be for you.
I'm just doing a little neck stretch. I like moved a second and I could feel the like little clink that, sometimes then it becomes a big thing. So I was like, I just need to like.
I had such a sore back after dancing at your hoedown the other night, and so did Jared and so did Ellen.
That means it was a good hoedown.
It was a good hoedown. Tanner's band is so amazing. So Ruby basically realizes that being a pianist is not necessarily on the cards for her. Sorry, I'm kind of jumping all over the place.
Is Shari hella good at the piano now?
So she talks about how, she's traumatized by it. Like every time I think she just doesn't play it anymore, if I remember rightly. Someone correct me if I'm remembering that wrong. But yeah, I don't think she has any positive feelings about the piano, which is sad because she's probably so good.
Yeah. I was like a little bit jealous of the kids who had parents that like made them be disciplined about it. But I'm sure it wasn't just discipline. It was like extreme control and
Shari's definitely the extreme version, but I know what you mean, because I'm always like, oh, wouldn't that have been nice to just have had like a slightly pushy parent in music? Oh, what I could be. But yeah, sadly that's not what happened here. So Ruby had also, just a bit of backstory I didn't mention, before having Shari, because Shari's the oldest daughter, she is described in the book as very vivacious. Like she's the girl at every ward activity at BYU who is like kind of commanding the room. Every man wants to marry her. She meets Kevin, and Kevin is basically very amiable, you know, seems able to sort of like go along with what she wants pretty easily. That's how they get together at, I think Ruby might have been 19, not certain. She has Shari, and basically the way Shari describes her entire childhood, which again, this was kind of what was most surprising to me about this part of the book, was just, it just doesn't sound like Ruby has any kind of like mothering instinct. Like sometimes you have like a strict Mormon mom, but there's still some kind of like underlying warmth, and like they really do like love children, and that there's something there. But it just sounded like Ruby was never, she not only wasn't warm to her children, but she like actively believed it was not good to be warm towards children. Like she thought that would, you know, like that old mindset that it will ruin a child if you like even fucking give them a hug. Yeah. Very much that mindset, which I think speaks a lot to the background she came from. Americans' views typically on parenting and children is kind of that like kids are the property of the parent. And that's why in Utah, and Shari talks about this a bit in the book, there's these laws called like free range parenting laws or whatever. America is a lot more open than say the UK where I'm from to, I mean like homeschooling. You can just kind of homeschool your kids here and like not teach them anything. And there's no consequences for that. There's no one sort of checking in. So America does have more of a like kids as property mindset, I think.
And then the next best thing, charter schools.
Oh, yeah. What's a charter school again? That's
like just a private school.
Okay. But for some reason, the other taxpayers have to fund it
charter
under the
because
Republicans?
it's off the charts. The charter school I went to for second and third grade, we used the like 1800s Noah Webster reader because that is obviously the most divine enlightened time period. Mm-hmm. And Noah Webster being the most prototypical master of the English language, and
his raps were insane.
Yeah.
People don't talk about Webster's raps nearly enough at the start of their sacrament meeting talks.
Yeah, he could have done Rap God, but Eminem could never do the dictionary.
So real. So back to Shari. Obviously, as the oldest child, a lot of the time you kind of bear the brunt of a lot of parental failures. She sort of describes throughout the book how her mum, because Ruby had really like zeroed in on, okay, child rearing, having a big family, that's how I'm going to sort of like become magnificent. You know, in this Mormon paradigm, I can't be a pianist. What can I do? I can have the perfect family. So she's constantly pumping out kids. Again, doesn't seem particularly interested in like nurturing or really like caring for these kids in the way that we would like hope that someone who has a lot of kids would be kind of naturally inclined towards. But she wants to be a star. And the way to be a star as a Mormon woman is to have a lot of kids. So she's pumping out all these kids. Shari is, as you would kind of imagine, and as we so often see in big Mormon families, she's becoming parentified quite early. She's feeling responsible, like emotionally and in other ways, for her younger siblings. So rampant in Mormon culture, you know, especially the oldest daughter. Anyway, so Ruby's not a good mother, and Shari doesn't really have any good memories with her, it sounds like. I mean, obviously, like, you know, there's always family stuff that can pass to good memory. But she seems to have a few more positive experiences with her dad, Kevin, than with Ruby, because it seems like Kevin does have more of that like genuine warmth and maybe playfulness. Something that is interesting is like, obviously 8 Passengers family vlogging is such a like playful pursuit, and it is like quite a creative thing to do. But then behind the scenes, it doesn't sound like Ruby's playful at all. Like Shari describes her as just constantly stressed, frenzied, anxious, you know, never okay. But then it's interesting seeing clips from their vlogs, even clips where they're talking about quite serious stuff, like Chad not having a bedroom for 7 months. And she's presenting as very kind of like calm and chill and good sense of humor, but it's like not the case at all. I wasn't an 8 Passengers viewer, so I'm sure a lot of people had very different impressions. But so Ruby basically gets into family vlogging because she discovers that it's a thing. Her sisters are getting into it. As soon as she hears about it, she's like, all right, let's do that. And it is kind of wild. It is wild to hear Shari talk about how like their lives just kind of changed in such a short period of time. They just went from being this normal, dysfunctional Mormon family to like suddenly, you know, if you want to earn like $100 to go to the mall with your friends, you need to be willing to like record an embarrassing moment for the family vlog. Like, and people are recognizing her everywhere she goes. Everyone at school obviously knows that she does this. sounds like Shari kind of never was really into it. Like, I think in the beginning, there was like this sense of excitement in the family. Like, oh, we're doing this new thing together. Isn't that fun? But then it's getting bigger and bigger. And Shari's like, this is feeling like we're never gonna, like, 'cause they weren't expecting it to like become everything.
Yeah.
So Shari's suddenly feeling like, oh, this is like our lives now. We're not going to just go back to, there's no going back. And that's kind of interesting to imagine from a child's perspective, like that, just like slowly losing privacy and autonomy and entering this like weird Truman Show type world. And then realizing like, oh, our family's like never going to go back. There was so much stuff with Ruby where it just felt like this runaway train where because of her sort of personality type, the only way that she would be stopped with something would just be like things getting more and more and more extreme. And then obviously she ended up in jail. There was certainly no reflecting on the part of the parents of like, how is this family vlog affecting the kids from what it sounds like? It was just like, this is what we have to do. It's so much money. But you can also tell that it's like even more than the money. It's like Ruby's ego, right? Ruby wants to be special. She is very narcissistic.
All of a sudden you have a job and you're not even getting paid. But made to feel like having a roof over your head.
That was another thing.
Is like...
Yeah, like all these kids are making so much money for them. When Shari decided to start her own channel so she could like raise money for herself for college, which like even the fact that she felt she had to do that feels so wrong. I'm like, if you've been contributing to the family vlog, or why aren't your parents paying for your college? They have so much money. Mm. But she's trying to start her own channel to make money for college. She asks Ruby, her mother, to give her a shout out on the 8 Passengers channel, you know, so she can like get subscribers. And Ruby was like, no, you need to get your first 100,000 subscribers on your own. 100,000? I know.
Oh my God. Gatekeeping your own children?
I know. Who you have forced to be in the family vlog for years.
Damn, that is
unhinged.
Insane.
So I might jump around a bit. But basically, Jodi comes on the scene as the family therapist. But more than that, she's doing this connections thing, right? Which is like Jodi's own cult. It's her own like set of ideas and programs. And Shari has a really bad feeling about Jodi right off the bat, which I thought was interesting because Shari talks in the book about how she's very much been primed to have like a major fawn response to, you know, any adult with any authority. But she seemed to pretty immediately pick up on the fact that there was something sus about Jodi. But even with that, got sucked into Jodi's kind of program. And this was something that felt very Mormon to me because she talked about how basically she's doing these weekly calls with Jodi that she's being forced to do. Jodi's whole thing is like truth and self-awareness, but it's just obviously all so bastardized and fucked up. But she's having Shari like keep a log of all the times that week that she like had an arrogant thought, for example. So Shari will come to the call and be like, I thought I was better than others 7 times this week, that, you know. And it's really just like, it's scrupulosity, it's OCD. She's being primed for it. Jodi was able to take something that was already there in these kids or in these adults as well, which is, that intense fixation on like monitoring your every thought, feeling like everything you do is sinful, feeling like you need to cleanse yourself from every bad thought, purge every evil impulse you have. But all it's actually doing is creating more anxiety, more reliance on the person who's like offering you redemption, which in this case became Jodi, not even the church. And it's just becoming so fucked up. And Shari, I think Shari was she was kind of like in deep with that. She got swallowed into it for I think it was about 9 months, but I don't remember the exact number. And then she said the thing that made her kind of wake up one day was when she was doing a call with Jodi, and Jodi said something about how a baby is selfish, or like a baby can be manipulative. And Shari was like, it's a baby. Like a baby is innocent. And Jodi's like, oh, you think a baby's innocent? No, a baby. And it's kind of that same, you know, that fundamentalist Christian group that I've talked a lot about where they do the blanket training, where if the baby leaves the blanket, they hit them, and then and then they routinely hit them. It's that like, it's the end point of so much of purity culture where people feel like they have to literally train a baby to it's under the guise of like obedience and discipline, like in its own best interest. But it's like, it's just child abuse. Like you're just abusing a baby. But under the guise of like, if we don't, from when this human is like, as soon as they enter the world, if we're not immediately like brandishing the whip.
Making them so afraid of stepping out of any kind of preconceived boundary that's been set upon them by the authority figures in their life, their parents and their religious leaders.
Yeah. It's so Mormon, but it's not just Mormon. It's like purity culture in general, kind of built on the back of this idea that you should be constantly afraid, and that if you let your anxiety drop for a minute, you'll do something sinful and you'll get yourself into hot water.
There's demons all around you that are constantly tempting you.
Again, so much of the Ruby Franke's story, it's like this to me is just like these Mormon concepts taken kind of to their furthest limits. I don't think that like gives Mormonism a pass, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Like purity culture is dangerous for reasons like this.
Yeah, exactly.
And if you look at all of the Mormon like crime stuff that's happened, like they're all obsessed, like the Chad Daybell stuff, they're all obsessed with visions of glory. They're all obsessed with purity. It seems like purity is like the perfect starting point, breeding ground for that kind of mindset of like, we must essentially like abuse kids into submission.
It makes sense because there is no such thing as purity. It's an idea that gets imposed on someone that if you do any of these behaviors, it makes you impure. And those are just words because at the end of the day, you're still the same organism you were before. There's no difference other than the way that you relate to your organism. And so by imposing the idea of purity, it is the like most basic form of control because you'll spend the rest of your life trying to become pure in the way that's been described to you by these people who are holding authority or who are, leveraging authority against you. But it's all just contrived. It's not real.
Yeah. Because to an average Mormon, Shari was already what she needed to be in terms of purity. This was not like a bad kid. She was very much sold on Mormonism. She believed in God. She did all the things that, they would consider righteous for a Mormon teen to do. She was already doing that. Jodi was coming in with all of this extra stuff. But again, the Mormon software was what like made her more vulnerable potentially to all of that. So anyway, Shari kind of realizes like Jodi's bad news, but the whole of the rest of her family is still mired in Jodi's ideology and becoming more entrenched by the day, which is so scary to imagine, just being like a teenager and you're like losing your family to this cult, your family that was already not great before, and now they're getting worse. And what is so chilling about Shari's book to me was like at every point from when she's a young child all the way up to sort of the present day, at every point she knows her mum is capable of anything, if that makes sense. Like she doesn't have much of a sense of like, oh, well, they wouldn't go that far. Like she seems to have this intuitive sense from a very young age that kind of anything's possible when it comes to her mother.
Yeah, there's a whole reservoir of negativity that's just waiting for the path of least resistance.
Another thing that was so scary is how Jodi was, because basically Shari becomes the black sheep of the family for sort of speaking up about Jodi. And Ruby and Jodi were able to like successfully convince Chad, who's Shari's next oldest brother, basically to not be in contact with Shari. Even though Shari's like this like goody two-shoes bookworm type and Chad's kind of like, bleh, bit of a Chad. A bit of a Chad, yeah. Outlandish.
To this day, they're still estranged?
No, not to this day. But like during this Jodi period before the arrest.
That makes sense.
Even though Chad has suffered so much under like the Ruby and Jodi rule, like he got sent to wilderness camp. They made him quit. Oh, it was heartbreaking. They made him quit sports. He was like a really promising athlete and sports was his whole world. And basically Jodi was like, he needs to quit. And so like that was going to be like his out, like that was like what he wanted to do. He was like in a good position to get athletic scholarships and that just all, I think it was like his sophomore or junior year, it was just like taken away from him by all of this, which is so sad. So like Chad has suffered so much under Ruby and Jodi's rule. And it seems so obvious to me that Shari is so clearly just like such a goody two-shoes and like a good older sister. But somehow they were able to poison the well so that even when Chad is like living on his own out of the house and Shari tries to go see him, he like won't see her, basically, won't accept a gift from her. And that was really sad and also like a scary reminder of how cult leaders and like authoritarian types and even just people who are abusive in relationships like so successfully often manage to isolate people from anyone who isn't going to back up like the lies that they're telling them, the ultimate lie being that like my truth is the ultimate truth. And like, because Shari's questioning that, it's actually that she's selfish and, all these other things. And if you kind of listen to the book, it's more surprising, I suppose, because it just felt like Shari had always had Chad's back. It didn't feel like there was ever any real bad blood between them, but it just shows how powerful how powerful brainwashing is and like abusive like authoritarian types can be. Yeah,
and especially within like family systems and then also in larger social systems where you do have that like dominant narcissistic personality that everyone else not only has to like work around and for constantly, but there's also like an identity thing. And this is especially true, I feel like, in Mormon families where the family is so central that they have to make a legal document outlining this, how specifically homophobic we have to be on this earth at this time.
Yep.
The way that like I can see how a kid wrestling with his estrangement and from parents and with childhood abuse and things, how easy it is for one relationship with the parent, narcissistic parent, can spread to the whole unit that the parent represents, that it's like, this is a family issue because that person is the center of the family that has made the family, you know, embroiled in all this conflict. So you don't just feel at odds with your mom, it's with everybody because she controls everything. And this is what we do as this family.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people, especially in Mormon families, people coming out of coercive religious systems, a big part of my own, healing process is being like, okay, how do I have individual relationships with family members and not just be constantly having this weird relation to the idea of the family, whatever that is. It's really, you have individual relationships with members of your family. You have individual relationships with members of your friend groups. You don't have a friend group, like.
Yes.
It's,
Yeah, I feel like that's that's such a good insight, especially for big families. Because with big families, it probably is so easy to kind of all align around like this concept of family. And, you don't necessarily get like a ton of one-on-one time with every member of the family as you're growing up.
Right.
I mean, I've even felt that as an adult, even though grew up as an only child. Like now my relationship with like my aunt and uncle is my relationship with my aunt and uncle. It's not on my parents to like arrange that for me. And I feel like...
Can't imagine having a relationship
with an aunt or an uncle. Your family's just so big.
No, I get nice messages once in a while from some of them.
But different sized families for sure. Yeah, I think that's so true. Like it's always so much more important to nurture individual relationships rather than like serving this weird concept of a friend group or a family. Because then it's just like a weird it easily becomes a loyalty thing rather than relating. Like it's not person relating to person. It's like person relating to system or like person relating to like role or, Yeah,
the ideals of the most domineering person in the unit.
Yeah. I feel like that's also, having no experience myself, probably what makes adult sibling relationships potentially difficult for a lot of people. Because obviously when you're growing up, your relationship with them is obviously within this family system in a very different sort of way than when you're adults. You kind of have to form that like individual bond. But so often there's like siblings have different perspectives on what happened in the family growing up because they obviously experience the family differently depending on, whether they were like the golden child or the scapegoat or, every sibling doesn't experience the family the exact same way.
Yeah.
Yeah, I suppose so much is engineered by parents growing up, especially in a household where you have a very domineering narcissistic parent, that then it's almost like this entirely new thing once you're not in that anymore.
Oh, yeah. And especially where there's like intense trauma, there can also be like huge gaps of memory.
Yeah.
And I've seen that with not my own friends, with siblings who just like don't even have something to build on because they just can't even like piece it back together, and it's too weird to do that.
Yeah, because sometimes like people's narratives, especially if one person has sort of like deconstructed the family or,
usually the one who was taking the brunt of abuse or whatever.
Yeah, that's what happened here. It's like Shari's the one who sort of deconstructed the family system. I can't think of a better way to say that. And then Chad is still kind of in it. And so for him to like accept Shari into his heart as his, to have a relationship with her would mean him having to believe, him agreeing that she's not evil. But then it's like, but his whole family system is saying that she is. So it's like they literally are asking, it's like demanding that he change his worldview. He'd have to be able to change his entire worldview. And the worldview is there, especially because he's still like young when he's just moved out of the house. It's like a lot of people have a lot of self-soothing storylines because like their brain is not ready yet to like go beyond that, because to actually reckon with like the abuse he faced growing up was probably, at that point too hard or like just wasn't within reach for him. So it's not just, can you have a different opinion from your mum about your sister? it's like, are you ready to kind of deconstruct your entire sense of reality? Which it's like the thing of like, you can't leave a cult with your dignity intact. It's also true with like abusive families or abusive relationships. Like you can't leave with your dignity intact. And I feel like such a clear sign that something has been like abusive is when a person who like steps away almost like has to be villainized or the system won't survive. It can't just be like, oh, Shari's got kind of different ideas and she's going off and she's doing her own thing, but we still love her. It has to be like, you're either in or you're out. Yeah. That kind of like you're either in or you're out mindset. Very Mormon. Very abusive relationship-y.
When did she like fully be like, this is heinous, I'm out of here?
So basically,
I'm writing a book about my mom.
So she started writing the book like after obviously the
arrest,
the jail and stuff. But basically she got like kicked. She got excommunicated from the family, you know? Like once she declared that she wasn't on board with all the weird Jodi stuff and was also
when did that come to a head?
So she obviously had that, the coaching with Jodi herself for like 9 months or however long, kind of woke up to it. And then it's kind of a process, like her final year in high school and then like her first year of college is kind of her wrestling with like wanting to be like somewhat involved in the family because she really cares about her younger siblings. And obviously she loves her family and it's her family and she's still so young. But then she's also feeling like she has to try and stand up for her siblings in certain ways, or like the level of allegiance that Ruby and Jodi were demanding was just like not possible for someone who wasn't a true believer, you know, because like they were unhinged, right? Yeah. So eventually she just gets like kicked out of the family, has no, like her parents do not contact her. If she tries to contact them, they don't like, and Ruby's like spiteful, you know, like she doesn't want Shari to get like the title to her own car, or like she doesn't want to give her like documents that Shari needs to like make a life on her own. It's very much like she's vindictive towards Shari, which also so upsetting to think of a parent being like that with a child, because I think there are so many parents who, even if their child did something really wrong, there's still love there. Like it wouldn't trigger the fact that Shari was so innocent and like active spitefulness existed in her mother towards her. Is just so upsetting and like such a deranged form of like what the parenting bond should be. Not that they'd ever had like a close bond, which is so sad. But it's like obvious point, kids should be bonded with their parents. Like parents should love their kids, even if they do things wrong, you know? As
Kanye once said, look, if you tell me you ain't did it, then you ain't did it. And if you did, that's family business.
So real.
That's how a lot of people act. But for your kid to be like, oh, you did it and you were so bad at rotten hell, that's quite telling.
And like what you did was like also, you didn't do anything. Basically, by the time Jodi and Ruby get arrested, Shari has kind of been sort of like taken in by this other Mormon family, which, you know, it listening to the book, it does make you grateful for just that kind of salt of the earth Mormon family that will just like take someone under their wing and be like, we will protect you. Like you come live with us. Like we got you. There's like some real Mormon heroes in this story. But yeah, she kind of is being sort of looked after by this other family, which is really nice. But obviously is like in constant meltdown about all of this and very worried about her younger siblings. Again, she also like starts learning more about like sort of the people that are interested in the Visions of Glory stuff and like the Chad and Lori Daybell stuff. I found this so chilling. Like she starts becoming aware that her younger siblings being killed is a real possibility. It's also wild, the similar pattern with Lori and Chad Daybell and Jodi and Ruby, where like the younger kids bear the brunt. It's almost like because they've played out this Mormon life, it hasn't given them enough like glory or whatever it is that they're seeking. So it's like the younger kids end up becoming like the guinea pigs for this new way of life and being so abused, which is really sad.
Instead of just the old-fashioning way of just like really burning out by the 11th child and just allowing them to
free
raise.
Range
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Pretty terrifying that, because Shari didn't describe her upbringing as like constant beatings or anything. She did say that Ruby would hit her. Like it certainly wasn't like a non-physically abusive home at all. She said her mum would just sometimes like hit her around the back of the head while she was playing piano, or like physical abuse happened, but like obviously not to the level that these younger children experience. So it's interesting to me that she becomes aware that it is a strong possibility that these kids could die. Like to have that feel, to be so estranged from all of them and to want to protect your younger siblings so bad but you can't do anything and you know they're being abused. I mean, at this point, she knows they're being abused, like at a base level. But the fact that she's actively worrying that they're going to die, like she said when she got the call from whoever that Ruby and Jodi were being arrested, her first thought was like, I hope they're not dead.
But that's the thing, is Mormon history is littered with instances where they ended up dying. Like, this isn't altogether uncommon. Utah history is full of it. Religious delusion amplifies all kinds of delusion. And when you build your whole life on delusion and shame and control, then it's bound to spin out. It's not like, oh, those are just people who took it way too far, or who, took the snippets that they wanted or just acted out poorly. You have to realize, like, this all feeds into that and regularly creates it. It's a product of this system. And every system has its products and its issues. But this one's especially unique, I feel like.
People will say, oh, Mormonism and Christianity, they're nothing like each other, like to the average Christian. It's like, couldn't be more different. But it's like, there's a reason that these two separate religions that both embrace purity culture, both easily lead to like, the baby blanket training where you're like hitting a baby for like when you're obsessed with like rooting out darkness, kind of as we're always saying, all people are actually doing in a lot of those situations is like repressing the darkness. It's coming out in more and more dysfunctional ways. Like with Jodi seemingly being very queer, like I feel like that's a classic example of how like this thing that she had to repress because she was in this fucked up purity culture. Who knows to what degree like her queerness is playing into all of it, but it doesn't seem irrelevant because it's like her pattern was to turn wives against their husbands and kind of install herself as kind of the de facto husband in the situation. Like, she's kind of becoming the patriarch in these families' homes. Like she literally moves in to the Franke household and like Ruby and Jodi are sharing a bedroom and Kevin's like in the spare room. Yeah, horror movie, truly. She's stepping into the role of the patriarch for all these families. She's doing it through purity culture and also probably because of purity culture, because that's the only way she can sort of have access to the kind of intimacy with women like Ruby that she seems to crave, physically as well as like emotionally and spiritually. Normal gay people in the church who like repress their instincts don't turn into Jodi. But in this situation, combined with her set of like personality traits, like very cluster B, it's certainly like all part of the equation. The fact that there's this thing in her that her church doesn't accept. So she almost has to create this entirely new ideology that justifies it. I think she even said in one of her connections videos once, or she said it to Ruby, I don't remember where I got this from. If she were to have sex with one of her female friends, it wouldn't be a sin because it would be so like spiritual and emotionally connecting.
I mean, that's what I'm always saying, and
and look how you turned out.
Yeah. No, where's that quote from the Gnostic Gospel of Saint Thomas? I believe it says that which is within you will save you. You have to get that which is within you out of you so it can save you, or that which is inside you will destroy you.
Tom.
The whole time.
I love a Gnostic Gospels reference.
Yeah, and he doubted, but not.
Just so ironic that she's tearing families apart on the premise that like these husbands are sexually impure in the service of getting her own like sexually impure desires met.
Yeah.
Unhinged. So classic though.
So classic.
Hypocrisy and purity culture go hand in hand because again, it's just built on a false premise, which is the idea that you can just like uproot all of the darkness in you. And also like spoiler alert, when you sort of confront all of the darkness within you, like it doesn't become this like massive monster that takes over your life. Like that's what actually gets everything more balanced. That's what helps you have the healthier, more functional parts of you sit in the driver's seat. Once you can like relate to the darkness within you lovingly rather than with this like frantic, like got to pull out every single, just that mindset of uprooting it all is so obviously leading to more of it that they think it's helping.
Yeah. Like a Jungian look, if you look at your darkness as like an archetype or as a character, and that these different characters interacting in your brain also change and act out depending on how you relate to them. So if you're viewing your darkness as this villain that's constantly threatening you that you have to kill, well, it's coming around the shadows with
Elmo's
that same
getting
energy.
Louder. When you're mean to Elmo, he screams louder. He gets shriller.
He burns down the house.
That's what Jordan Peterson needs to understand.
So it was just got too crazy with Jodi. She goes to college. She's being taken care of. She It's there in college that she finds out they've been arrested.
Yes.
She's still living with that family, or?
Well, she's not quite, because she does like live with roommates in college. There's
It's just
also
like,
a whole side storyline which also feels so Mormon adjacent, even though it happens to people in and outside Mormonism and religion, where she essentially, this older bishop type guy, I don't know if he was a bishop but someone who like is a priesthood holder and like in his 40s or whatever, takes a fancy to her, takes her under his wing, and just becomes is like abusing her, like sexually, and is like constantly harassing her, and like, but it's like this thing where she's feeling a lot of guilt about it because she doesn't realize, like, she's trained to fawn. She's trained to kind of like just say yes to things. So she feels like she's participating in it, even though she's like not, and she's not able to even really talk to her therapist about it for the longest time. So this older guy, and she talks about how like, because he originally is like, come help me do social media stuff for my business. And she's like, oh, well, he's a very well-respected priesthood holder in the community. You know, like he has a great reputation, which we see this all the time in Mormonism, where like if someone's a worthy priesthood holder with a great reputation, like the ability they have to abuse young girls is like so much higher. And
because Mormon leaders have discernment, God is behind every calling. So if the man's got a good calling, then we know that he's been cleared by God.
Yeah, that's so real. So yeah, the whole side storyline that's going alongside this is like for her whole first year of college, and then I think maybe longer, she's, I think it was like several years. She's in this like fucked up relationship with this older man who's like texting and calling her if she ever like does anything or goes anywhere, and wants to know everything about her life, and is using her trauma, because she originally like confides in him about her family stuff, like when they first kind of start hanging out in a work context. And he very quickly latches onto that as like, oh, I'm the only one who you can talk to about this. Like I'll keep you safe. I understand you. And also because she doesn't have parents that are showing up for her. When she's trying to like get a new apartment and she needs like an adult to like co-sign it, she gets him to do it. And so it's like all working together. She's just this like incredibly vulnerable Mormon teen, who has no like concept really. She has like some instincts, but she's not aware of who to trust and who not to trust, because she's never been taught. You know, she knows her family is fucked up, and she knows her family is like not in line with the church, but then it's also like kind of iffy, you know, because she still is Mormon. So then there's still these other people who can exploit that. And yeah, it's just like a nightmare. So that's like a whole side storyline. Again, this is why I say like whatever we say here isn't going to spoil the book, because it's just like there's so much in it that we wouldn't be able to talk about in just one video. But
that makes total sense.
Yeah. And oh God, it's so fucked up. So she eventually does talk to her therapist about this and realizes she needs to end this relationship with this guy, which she never like signed up for, if you know what I mean, but she has to end it. And she doesn't seem super cognizant of the fact that like you're not in like a consensual relationship with this man, but she sort of feels like she is.
Because you've never been taught consent, and you've never been taught relationships, and you've never been able to experience that in reality, only by like through the lens of your super hyper controlling evil parents.
Yeah, so in her mind, when he touches her inappropriately for the first time in the middle of a panic attack, he's like, we need to do skin to skin because you're having a panic attack. I know, it's so dark. When he does that, she thinks because she didn't like fight back that she's to blame, which is very much a Mormon teaching. They have said like, protect your virtue with your life. It's better to come back in a body bag than to have your virtue defiled. And that was interpreted even through the lens of like, if someone tries to sexually assault you and you don't, like, it's better to lose your life fighting it than to be sullied. That was explicitly taught
by Mormon prophets.
Absolutely unhinged. Like encouraging women to potentially like lose their lives. Like not that there's any like good outcome there, but do you know what I mean?
Because you believe that act against them makes them impure.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is like so fucked up of an ideology, and you think you're being like anti-rape or something like that by saying that. Yeah. You're like not giving in.
Yeah.
But it's literally just evil.
When really it's like any logical person who even believes in like the atonement of Christ and Mormonism could see that like if someone abuses you and you have a trauma response where you just like freeze, like obviously that's not your fault. Like why would you need to atone for that? Insane. So yeah, that's another like whole aspect of this story. But when she goes to her bishop, she like confesses, And abuse takes a long time to know how to talk about, right? And so she's like just coming to terms with the fact that like this needs to end. This is like not a safe person. But she's going to her bishop to like confess, you know, not to be like, I've been being sexually abused by this adult man. Yeah. So basically, she ends up facing discipline. She has to not take the sacrament, or she loses her temple recommend for like, it's not for very long. I can't remember if it's for like a couple months or a few weeks, but she loses her temple recommend. He apparently never does. Like she asks the bishop, like, what's going to happen with him? Basically, so then her bishop, like, who seems to be like somewhat on her side, but also is like working this fucked up system and has to ask the stake president what to do. And then the stake president is obviously saying like, take the temple recommend away. So they contact his bishop. He just denies everything. So he doesn't face any punishment. And she's like, I think she's not a minor when it happened because she's in college.
He denies everything. So then they're like, oh, well, then I guess you're just lying, or...
But then she still gets, she's like punished either way. Like they obviously believe it happened because they took her temple recommend away.
Kind of seems like that story.
No, I know, because it's like Mormonism was like sort of something safe for her in her life in the sense that like all she knew was her family and church and school. And obviously she's in Utah. So it's like the outside world is kind of like safer than her family to her. And Mormonism is generally, while she's growing up, a lot safer than her home is. But then it's like, yeah, she's obviously internalized all of these ideas about purity. Is just like purity culture is running through this entire story. That's why I say it's like a Mormon story. And even though it's bigger than just Mormonism, it's many religions. But yeah, it's purity culture. And like people like Jodi would never have had the power that she had without the bedrock of purity culture. Ruby would never have, or like everyone in the story would not have been as susceptible. Like Kevin, let's talk about Kevin for a moment. So he's just like this, like from the impression I get, kind of like a go with the flow dad, you know, who's like got this narcissist wife that he has to defer to a lot. As Jodi becomes part of their life, just becomes more and more incompetent, like cannot function in his role as a father, like can't protect his kids in any way, is kind of just like going gently into the night. Like when Jodi says go, he goes. So he becomes, well, functionally useless as a parent and also like part of the problem. You can tell that he definitely like wasn't, not to say that he was like a good parent leading up to this point, but he was like ousted from the family once Jodi moved in and kind of like lost all ability to have a say. Like he wasn't involved in like the end stages of abuse with those kids. Like it doesn't sound like that would have been okay with him. But it's also like so scary how Mormon purity culture was like the weapon Jodi was able to use to turn Ruby and Kevin against each other and to turn Kevin on himself, because that's kind of Jodi's method, as we saw by the coaching calls she would do with Shari. It's like she wears down people's spirits so much through, you know, essentially like telling them they're sinful in like more Jodi flavored ways. Like Jodi's been successful at breaking up tons of marriages for this reason. We know that from like all the Mormon Stories episodes I've watched. And Adam, what was his last name? The Boy Scout, I can't remember his last name, but Adam's story. Like Jodi is able to get men to turn on themselves because of the purity culture of Mormonism and like the, you know, if you have even a single sexual thought, like you did it, you're a pedophile. Yeah. And then it's also like that weird thing where if you're getting someone to obsessively count and monitor like every impure sexual thought they had that week, it's like the don't think about a pink elephant, right? It's creating more of it's so wild to me how sophisticated her methods are, but then how also they're so kind of like textbook to cult leaders, as we always talk about with cult leaders, that there just seems to be this like intuitive playbook that like manipulative people naturally learn throughout their lives. And so it's just like second nature to them. It's not even like they're necessarily strategizing that hard. Yeah. They just seem to know. That's so terrifying, because I think so much when we encounter personality types like that, it's easy to kind of, you know, at a lower level typically than like this, obviously. But like you try and like out strategize them sometimes, but it's kind of like you never will. Like that's like why they say like with narcissists, for example, you want to be as boring as possible. Like don't try and play the game if you like encounter someone like that, or if someone who's trying to smear campaign you, which was like one of Jodi's like main strategies with Kevin, you know, with everyone. is like, just be a gray rock, be as boring as possible, because you can't like outmaneuver them, because it's just, you're not playing the same game, you know?
So where's she at now? Is she still in the church?
Yeah. So the book is still very, she'll critique aspects of Mormon culture, you know? And she doesn't just seem like she's probably still pretty orthodox is the impression I get. Like, she's a believing Mormon as far as I could tell.
She's still in school?
I think she may have graduated now. But she, you know, you can tell that she has clung to like Jesus and Heavenly Father as sort of a safe deity figure. Like there were times when she was really like in like the darkest parts of, you know, getting cut off from Ruby and whatever. She talked about how like the thought that comforted her was, it doesn't matter what they think about me, because like I know that Jesus loves me and thinks highly of me. And there's something I can appreciate about that, of like, you know, even these Mormon leaders in her life are not being safe men, but like an imaginary deity can potentially be safe.
And it makes you wonder if that's the whole reason that it exists in the first place.
I mean, yeah.
It's for men to control your idea, and at the worst and at the best, so that you can have a fake man to let you feel like everything's going to be okay.
Yeah, it's like obviously you could never begrudge someone in her situation from keeping their faith in Christ, because that's what like saw her through some of her darkest times. And really at the end of the day, it's just this idea that there is this like loving male deity who cares about her and like does still align with a lot of the teachings of Mormonism. But she does seem to have some awareness that it was like, yeah, she talks about the stuff with like the bishop and the guy who abused her, with awareness that it was wrong that she was punished and he wasn't. Like, yeah, she's not like blind to the fact that it was unfair the way she was treated in that system. And she does like write about that whole thing, you know, with a very like coercion based lens, which is good. But I still just wanted to like, there's so many points in the story where you're like, she's taking this on so much when she's so clearly a victim. And it sounds like she had a good, I think, BYU therapist, and the therapist basically helped her realize like a lot of how she was acting with that man was like a fawn response. So she has reckoned with the fact that it wasn't her fault. Like, but there's still, I don't know. Yeah. I feel like it just has to go so deep. Like it's probably going to be, I mean, it is going to be like a life's work for her probably to learn how to relate to all this and to like untangle the weird ways that she still feels like shame. And it's a lot. I mean, like what happened with that older man alone could potentially like devastate someone for ages, but then all the family stuff, it's remarkable what humans can survive and then like write an amazing memoir about. I hope that like writing the memoir was like a healing thing. I imagine it would be, yeah. Especially because like, yeah, I mean, she didn't have control of her own narrative throughout her entire adolescence. It's a lot. I would definitely recommend listening to the book if you haven't yet. Well, the one thing I was going to say about the Kevin thing that I just find interesting, because obviously like Mormonism is a patriarchal religion. So we're kind of inclined to think that like men are the ones who are running the show. But it is interesting when you have a dynamic like Ruby and Kevin, or like Jodi. I guess Jodi didn't have a male partner, but just like these kind of like female narcissist types who have husbands in that system. That's just kind of an interesting like reversal in some ways. But then it's like the purity culture. A lot of the time, like the shame that men will feel seems to be what allows it to happen. Because it's not uncommon to hear of, like it does, just because it's a patriarchal religion doesn't mean that every man is like in charge.
Right.
There's a lot of cases of marriages where like the woman is the one being like in control in an excessive or abusive way in Mormonism. Like men aren't like immune to that just because of the patriarchy. So it just makes me ask, like, how is that possible? And I guess it is just, personality types. Like, patriarchy doesn't protect you from personality necessarily. Mm-mm. But then also, I do feel like there's a lot of Mormon men who are, like, a lot of good Mormon boys are just raised to be very, like, obedient as well, and, like, duty-driven. And Mormons in general are kind of, like, infantilized. So obviously they're getting married so young a lot of the time, so you can see how a Mormon man could be like lower functioning than he like ideally would be as like a father and a spouse, so isn't able to like assert, because even though he's the man, so like in theory he has more power, it's like he still exists in a system where there's like people always have power over him. Like outside of the church, when you're not part of like a hierarchical thing like that, I mean, there's not like people that have like power over us in the same way, in such a like constant, close way. How just like submission to authority generally can create it for both genders.
Patriarchy hurts everybody.
So true, Dan.
Glad she's okay and the siblings are okay. Are they back with their dad or?
I think it's eventually they will be. I think it's like a process for like Kevin to earn back his kids, you know, for understandable reasons.
Yeah.
That's the thing as well. It's like, it's so hard with all of this because like, yeah, Kevin was like a victim of all of this, but that also doesn't like get you off the hook for the fact that like you allowed your kids to be abused. And even though, yeah, like I totally see all the mechanisms that led to a situation where he wasn't able to like claim his power as a father, but you still like are responsible for the kids. You still chose to have kids. And that's like my frustration with so much of Mormonism and parenting is like you can so see how so many Mormon parents had kids way too young, are not equipped, do not possess the skills to like do certain things that kids need, are not able to like protect their kids in certain ways. So on some level, like it's not their fault. We still need to be like, yeah, but you have to own the fact that you had kids. And you have a responsibility to your kids. Like it's kids, so they have to like matter more than you.
Banks is here to remind us that it is dinner time.
It's also Tennis Shoes Among the Nephites time.
Oh, is it?
Bit of a change of pace if we have, well, we might not have enough time. We have 16 episodes of Tennis Shoes Among the Nephites for you to binge if you're interested in a palate cleanser after this. It's a lot lighter.
So hop on over right now.
Yeah.
I think you said it all.
No, yeah. That was the perfect outro, Banksy. Thank you. We're so glad you could join us today.
Have a good one.
Bye.